brave people.
It's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Mike Rubinio, today's speaker. I'm just going to give you a very brief introduction and let him go into his lecture. Mike received his PhD in Natural Resources from the University of Michigan, and he's worked in the aquaculture industry, including being the CEO of an R&D shrimp farm, and then he moved into being a partner in running that shrimp farm in North Carolina. He's also worked for the World Bank, and since 2004 has led the aquaculture program at NOAA. And one of the things he's trying to do is to develop a new policy for aquaculture in NOAA. And today he's going to talk to us and answer the question we hope: is aquaculture for sustainable use of the sea? Welcome.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me okay? Hopefully we've got two microphones here. The feedback will work. Anyway, thank you, Carolyn, very much for that kind introduction. Thank you, Julia Parrish, for inviting me, and to the Bevan family for sponsoring this series, the university for hosting, and Doug DeMaster, the director of the Alaska Fisheries Science Center. I don't think is here today, but I think put me in touch with Julia concerning the series. I know there are a number of my colleagues from NOAA here as well, so I want to thank you for coming. Thank you for your encouragement over the past several years, and I've learned a tremendous amount from you about this topic. So although I grew up along the shores of the Chesapeake Bay, I do have some family roots here, actually at the University of Washington. My maternal grandmother graduated from the University of Washington during the First World War. And she was the president of the Women's League. She played on the basketball team. And she actually has a mountain named after her at the Olympic range, Mount Gladys. Some of there's a story behind it. I think she won some kind of a competition in high school. So little did I know when I came out here as a teenager to visit cousins and to climb the Cascades that I would come back so often during the past several years. To this place that in some ways is one of the two birthplaces of aquaculture as we know it today in the United States. This region was partially built on seafood, and it's where shellfish farming and where salmon hatcheries are still very much part of the culture. So this is really a good place, this region, to talk about this question: is aquaculture a sustainable use of the sea? As a number of you have heard me say over the past several years, we really stand at a crossroad in the development of aquaculture in the United States. Environmental and food safety concerns and the economic ramifications of aquaculture are the subject of much debate and widely differing views. So, can aquaculture deliver on its promise and substantially increase seafood production in a way that is economically, environmentally, and socially sustainable? Will increased seafood farming put additional strains on ocean resources and compete with wild-caught fisheries? Or will it be the sustainable solution to close the seafood gap? Can domestic aquaculture help improve the safety and security of our seafood supply, maintain working waterfronts, create jobs, coastal communities to the agricultural heartland, and at the same time restore the health of ecosystems? A tall order. These are the questions that are not so simple. So during the next half hour or so, I won't necessarily answer these questions, or this one, but I'll explore it. And in a way, explore it by offering observations from my past 4 or 5 years on this job. I'll first outline a couple of definitions of sustainability. We are in an academic setting, after all, so I can do that here. Then I'll discuss, in turn, the environmental, economic, and social underpinnings of sustainability, and end with a look at current initiatives at NOAA to address this problem. So, in Australia, shrimp are prawns and prawns are shrimp. So, just so we're all on the same page, the definition of aquaculture that I'm using today is really sort of the Catholic definition, the small c. It's also the federal definition. It includes what we normally think of as commercial aquaculture, as well as public aquaculture, the use of hatcheries for stock restoration, habitat rehabilitation, and so on. Also, I should note that we live in a global marketplace, and uses of the sea have global implications. So ultimately, the question that headlines my lecture must be answered looking at aquaculture around the whole world. But I've only got about 35 or 40 minutes. So given the constraints of a lecture, I would like to focus on commercial marine aquaculture and aquaculture here in the United States. So some context. Oceans, which is most of the globe, provide about 2% of our food production, maybe 16% of our protein supply. Land availability for agriculture is narrowing. Capture fisheries probably have been maxed out. I think we've all heard that the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization projects that most future increase in seafood supply will come from aquaculture. So where does the U.S. stand in this? We're a major consumer of aquaculture products, but a very, very small producer. U.S. aquaculture supplies about 5%, and marine aquaculture only 1.5% of our food supply, seafood supply in the U.S. Wild capture fisheries about only 10% of what we eat here in the U.S. Most commercial marine aquaculture is shellfish farming. Oysters, clams, and mussels, by far. That's most of commercial marine aquaculture. Although I talked about the definition, we don't keep federal statistics that way. And if we included salmon catch that are based on hatcheries, that would also be an important aquaculture sort of sector of the economy. So to start with some working definitions of sustainability. I think the former Prime Minister of Norway will forever be remembered for this quote that is used over and over again in terms of definition of sustainability. But what does that mean in practice, and how are we defined it in practice? I think it's come to mean what the Europeans would call the triple bottom line: environmental, economic, and social sustainability. And while very few of us ever use a milking stool anymore, I sort of like the analogy that you need all three legs of that, otherwise it falls over. I think some of the literature that I included on the abstract, some people would argue that no food production now in use is truly sustainable. That either from an energy or sort of biodiversity perspective. All food systems generate waste, require energy, use water, change land cover, or change the oceans. So the best we can do, they argue, is to sort of be more efficient about how we operate. One approach to dealing with that is what's termed eco-efficiency. 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. Do less bad. Anyway. Others would say, no, we're shortchanging things. They really argue that unsustainable production is really a design failure. And they're arguing for a more holistic approach to design. You could refer to Paul Hawkins, Amory Lovins, and Hunter Lovins. Came out with a book about 10 years ago called Natural Capitalism. Bill McDonough, the architect, and Michael Braungart, the chemist and one of the founders of Greenpeace in Europe, about the same time came out with a series of articles and then brought it together in a book called Cradle to Cradle. They're amongst the proponents of what might be called design with nature, or a more holistic approach to design. It's a design strategy in which, in their words, quote, the byproducts of production are food either for nature's ecosystems or materials for humans' industrial systems, perpetually circulating in systems that create value and are inherently healthy and safe. Bill McDonough likes to use the example of a cherry tree. They're blooming all over town, which is a great thing to see. The tree converts sunlight, it absorbs water and nutrients, blooms, grows leaves, the leaves fall, they decompose, the cycle starts over again. You get the idea. All of this sounds idealistic, but if you go poke around the website of either the Rocky Mountain Institute or the McDonough Brown Dark design firm, they're applying this to manufacture of carpets, furniture, Ford Motor Company, industrial facilities all over the world. It's fascinating. It really makes you think about our own field of aquaculture and fisheries in terms of how to design things. So I've learned a lot from them. And actually I found that both of those terms, eco-efficiency and eco-effectiveness, are useful in looking at aquaculture and evaluating aquaculture. So just a little bit of background. Why am I here? Why can I talk about sustainability? I think I've learned a little bit about it firsthand. When I, just out of graduate school, teamed up with a couple of other guys who were trying to grow things in actually the South Carolina ponds, those old tidal rice fields and duck hunting ponds. And we tried a whole variety of things. Shrimp worked the best. So we learned how to smell the ponds, prepare them, seed them in the spring, harvest in the fall. We bootstrapped the company, got bank loans, got product to market, made payroll. We made an operating profit. We did it for over 10 years. But about the same time, the real price of shrimp started to decline. It was not financially or economically sustainable. In 1990, I gave a paper at the World Bank entitled Sustainable Shrimp Farming. It was one of the first conferences where the word sustainable was used in the business context to look at practices. And that actually led a few years later, when it became clear that we really couldn't make careers out of shrimp farming in South Carolina. I went and worked for the World Bank for the next 10 years. And worked at that intersection of environment and business. And put together a whole variety of environmental investment funds for renewable energy, energy efficiency, biodiversity, ecotourism, carbon funds. Each one of those funds had not just financial criteria for investment, but environmental and social criteria. Again, the triple bottom line in practice. So as you heard, in the past couple of years, 4 years, 5 years, I've returned to aquaculture, this time in the federal government, to apply this concept of sustainability to NOAA's management, research, and international activities in aquaculture. I've certainly learned very fast that aquaculture is not a one-size-fits-all kind of approach. And I understood that coming into the job, but as I go around and visit hatcheries and facilities and processors around the country, I'm reminded of it over and over again. I've also spent the past 4 or 5 years listening to Alaska fishermen, to shrimp processors in Biola Battery, Alabama, to environmental advocates in California, bait fish dealers in Florida, tourism operators in Hawaii, Native Americans here in Washington State. And through them, I've learned a lot about their perception of what sustainability is. And that's what I wanted to share a little bit today. So in turn, the first peg or leg was environment, so environmental sustainability. That's shrimp farms in Asia, I won't say which country. But you can see the aerators going, they're probably doing it pretty intensively. Aquaculture raises all kinds of environmental concerns, just like agriculture. Resource depletion, biodiversity impacts, changes in ecosystem health, excess waste, genetic impacts, disease, use of drugs and chemicals, ecosystem disturbance to deciding on projects. These are important concerns, and we must address them because we don't want to repeat what happened in terrestrial agriculture. So we want aquaculture to be managed in the context of ecosystem management, of marine stewardship, healthy ecosystems. We'd like to think we've learned from agriculture. From a commercial perspective, this also makes sense. The long-term financial viability of aquaculture depends on a healthy environment. Earning short-term profits at the expense of the environment doesn't work for aquaculture. You need to go around the world with examples. So that's sort of the bad news. The good news is that even during my career, there have been tremendous advances in aquaculture, reflecting advances in feed efficiency, fish health, best management practices, knowledge about where to site facilities, informed regulations. Have U.S. producers made mistakes in the past? Of course. Is there room for improvement? Yes. But from what I've seen over the past 5 years, and earlier than that around the world, aquaculture can be done in an environmentally sustainable way if you apply some of those design principles. Please understand, I'm not here as a commercial for aquaculture. Like I said, aquaculture, like any human activity, can have tremendous impacts. Aquaculture is a tool. It's up to us to use it. If you get out, and I hope all of you can, go out and visit U.S. aquaculture growers around the country, they take environmental stewardship and sustainability very seriously because their livelihood depends upon it. I think they are addressing these concerns of sustainability, and they're being very innovative about their practices. They have to innovate to survive. Let me just run through some quick examples. Environmental sustainability would suggest that we should grow more macroalgae and shellfish, these mollusks, things that are low on the food chain and generate water quality benefits. Remember that most of marine aquaculture in the United States is farming of mollusks. So let's do more of it. And let's sort of marry that up with native oyster restoration to get the double benefits of commercial shellfish and restoration in terms of water quality. Alternative feeds. There's a lot of concern about feeding fish to fish, but there's tremendous innovation going on in terms of use of fish trimmings in aquaculture feeds, oil seeds, algae, marine worms, and other alternatives. I think we'll see aquaculture go to using fish meal and fish oil for rootstock maintenance, larval nutrition, and then there's a finishing diet at the end. And in the middle, you'll have this vast array of other products depending upon cost and availability. I know that you guys all know about salmon. And salmon is an icon here in the Northwest. But if you really want to go see what salmon aquaculture has become, go to Maine. I think you would, if you haven't been there for a while, you would be astounded. The Endangered Species Act forced Maine to switch from Norwegian stock to Maine stock. So now you've got Fish and Wildlife, NIMS, the state, the Agricultural Research Service, and the commercial industry all working side by side on the genetics of salmon for conservation biology purposes and marine aquaculture purposes. All the farms are sited and are fallowed during their reproduction cycle. It's coordinated with the Canadian side of the border. They've got underwater cameras for feeding. All the fish are genetically marked, so each escape can be traced back to the farm. Vaccination has replaced antibiotics. The list goes on. It's very impressive. And they're continuing to innovate. One of the areas that they're really working on, I guess I should say before I say that, the commercial sector is backed up with a very innovative plan, sort of pushed by state funding in terms of research. So you've got the University of Maine. They have research facilities. There are agricultural research facilities right next door working on all of these sort of R&D issues for salmon farming, and they're now applying that to cod and halibut and other species. They do the same thing with shellfish, by the way. So I was going to say that a number of the researchers at the University of Maine are working with the salmon company and colleagues in Eastern Canada on what's called IMTA. It's not the old dance about YMTA. It means integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. We used to call it polyculture. So they've got salmon, mussels, and algae growing in proximity to each other, taking up different areas of the trophic level and nutrients. Curiously, somehow this, I can see the idea of the algae and the mussels taking up the nutrients. Somehow salmon also gets a prophylactic health benefit of having these other things around it. We don't quite know why yet. That's the subject of current research projects. We've also got it here at the Manchester lab with all fisheries, growing algae in the effluent. So it can be done, and it's being done in a lot of places around the world. Southern California. Some have suggested that marine aquaculture producers should look inland instead of further out to sea to grow marine species in recirculating systems like this one. Like other promising technologies, recirculating systems have their pros and cons. The pros are more control, easier permit, perhaps you don't have all those conflicting coastal uses. You've got a lot of control in terms of biosecurity. But the cons include land, water, and energy use, high costs of construction, and you've also got solid and gaseous wastes that have to be disposed of somehow. But I think we're going to see not this model, but there are a lot of warehouses going up in places you wouldn't expect around the country growing tilapia. And all of them can add salt and switch to marine species, and they're thinking about it very seriously. I know the rap on these things has been that if you get a pathogen in them, you get a catastrophic failure. So they work for 4 or 5 years and the whole system collapses, and you pretty much have to dynamite it and start over again. You can never get it out of there. But there are other approaches being designed, sort of fractal approaches with different units and redundant units. It's a little more expensive, but it may decrease the risks. This is a very promising area in terms of marine aquaculture. So that's what I had to say about environmental sustainability. Now on to economics. You know, without economic or financial viability, there is no sustainable aquaculture. So is U.S. aquaculture economically sustainable? U.S. production has been relatively stable for the past 10 years, at about $1 billion a year farm gate value, or 500,000 metric tons of production. It means it hasn't increased though. The market demand has increased quite a bit. So why isn't U.S. production increasing? Is it due to economics? I guess you could read this slide. As you can see from this slide, there are lots and lots of factors that go into economic sustainability. This is a slide Gunnar Knapp put together, Gunnar Knapp from the University of Alaska put together for a report we did a couple of years ago on the economics of marine aquaculture. It's available on our website. It goes into all of these various factors in different chapters. Some countries have got very low labor and land costs. They have lax or unenforced environmental, social, and food safety requirements. So many U.S. aquaculture products face competition in these low-cost imports. I saw it with shrimp 10, 15 years ago. We're now starting to see it with catfish, trout, even mollusks. Is it really because of we have high labor costs and high environmental standards in this country? Yeah, maybe in some cases. It's tough to compete with commodities such as processed frozen shrimp and fish, where the FDA can only inspect 2% or so of what comes into the country. But the Norwegians, with high labor costs, rigorous environmental requirements, somehow they've been able to dominate the world farm salmon market. So you'd like to think that we could do something like that here too with aquaculture. I think the other thing that's coming, if salmon is any indication, we'll see cost curves for salmon or catfish or shrimp or chickens, and they come down like orders of magnitude over time. We're just starting with marine species, marine finfish, and some of the mollusks. And with innovation, with domestication for things like fillet yield, disease resistance, fast growth rate, I think we're going to see costs come down by orders of magnitude in some of these other marine species. I think the other element I wanted to bring out in terms of costs is that, and maybe far more important here in the United States, is the next slide. For marine aquaculture, we have a lot of uses of our coastline. It's very, very difficult to get through a permit process. It's expensive, it's time-consuming, it's risky. So U.S. producers, including shellfish farmers in this region, are going to other countries to set up shop to supply a growing market here in the United States. I think this is one of our biggest constraints for marine aquaculture. So where are the bright spots? And what can we build on? Right now, it's mostly producers who are targeting high-value niche markets with transportation cost advantage over imports. So it's the live market. It's fresh, whole, gutted fish and fillets. Here's some slides showing clams in Virginia, oysters in the Northeast and Northwest, salmon in Maine. These guys are making money. The last way, social sustainability. This one's difficult to define. From whose perspective? Is it from the perspective of communities, fishermen, aquaculture entrepreneurs, importers, seafood processors, rich people, poor people, coastal landowners? From what I'm hearing as I go around the country, social sustainability here in the U.S. really comes down to a couple of concerns. Seafood and health, affordability of seafood, competition in the market between fishermen and aquaculture, changes in traditional community structure, and competition for coastal space, which I mentioned. So how do we balance all these competing uses? We inherited sort of the English town system. We call it a political process. We also have an economic process. Willingness to pay. Fortunately, we also, I think, have some determined community leaders who spend a lot of time bringing people together and trying to forge consensus to do new things. I mentioned to a couple of you coming in that I spent yesterday morning with Betsy Peabody of the Puget Sound Restoration Fund. What she said to me about the links between native oyster restoration and food, and the importance of sort of communicating the message that not only do you need to do the restoration, but you need to do it in a way so that you can actually eat that product and understand the water quality benefits really resonated. It was very powerful. So I think you're blessed in this region to have a number of people like that who are working on this issue. One of the concerns I hear about over and over again, especially in this region, is competition with commercial fishing. Aquaculture is going to put U.S. fishing out of business. Competition between culture and wild products may be serious. I mean, we saw that with salmon, we saw it with shrimp, where a large volume of supply came on the market in a very short amount of time, prices went down. Fishermen were hurt. Aquaculture producers were hurt too. Here's how sort of Gunnar Knapp and Alaska and Jim Anderson at the University of Rhode Island, some of our leading fisheries economists who represent this. They would point out, though, that the competition would be there with or without U.S. aquaculture. Remember, U.S. aquaculture is very, very small. So the competition is really coming from imports. It's coming from chickens, beef, and pork as well. Competition for that center of the plate. So, the real challenge, I think, for commercial fishermen concerned about aquaculture is to go back to the idea of using aquaculture as a tool. That there are a range of technologies out there to produce seafood, and that maybe aquaculture, or these various hybrids between aquaculture and fishing, is something that they can look at and use. As I said, it's not a one-size-fits-all, but there are many examples around the country, and we just want to rattle through a whole bunch of them very quickly, where fishermen and people from traditional seafood families are using aquaculture and weaving it into their traditional business practices. In Maine, you see it all over, up and down. Shellfish farming next to lobster fishing. Actually, lobstering may actually be a form of aquaculture, when you think about it. In New Hampshire, a lot of that technology development for new cages for offshore aquaculture or exposed aquaculture was done by the University of New Hampshire. But before they started, they went down to the docks in Portsmouth and said, work with us on this. So all of these technologies that you're now seeing, at least in terms of U.S. technology, was developed by fishermen working with engineers. Not just on finfish, but also adapting some of that long line process for New Zealand mussels, which fishermen up and down New England now are applying for permits for. These are pictures of guys off from Martha's Vineyard and Cape Cod. There are 3 or 4 permits being permitted there. There are another 3 or 4 in Rhode Island. They're looking at this up and down the coast. Go to Rhode Island and Massachusetts and look at oyster farming. It may not be the guys who were my age and older who are doing it, but their sons have learned how to farm oysters. And they're getting 50 cents to $1 a piece wholesale. They're now employing their fathers, their uncles, their grandfathers in this case their grand uncle, to work with them. These guys may go fish their quota one day, and not too many days left. They may do lobstering another, but then they come and work the oysters as well. A third of the shellfish on the East Coast are produced in Virginia. These companies have been around for a long time. We've gone from oysters to being amongst the biggest clam producers to now going back into oysters as these triploid high-health oysters become available. North Carolina, if you drive up and down the coast, you can see, you go from one hamlet to the next, and you see these crumbling fish houses, and you see boats at dock. Jimmy Morris, sixth-generation fisherman on both sides of the family, speaks with one of these Elizabethan brogues you can barely understand. Now runs the largest clam hatchery in North Carolina. He learned how to do this by himself. He still has a shrimp boat, but he spends most of his time in the clam hatchery. His son, by the way, works for Rubinio, and has a PhD in fisheries and aquaculture. Hawaii. The offshore aquaculture you've heard about in Hawaii, a lot of it was started by Randy Cates, a fisherman, working with Oceanic Institute, who hired his buddies. They worked with the Oceanic Institute, adopted technologies, and are making it work. So, as I said, it's not one size fits all. You're not going to see this everywhere. It may not apply to the Pacific Northwest. But in some parts of the country, aquaculture and fishing are now thought of as a continuum of technologies to produce seafood. And you start to see bumper stickers like this in these communities. Working waterfronts. How do you keep working waterfronts going? The buzzword in the Beltway in Washington is blue-green jobs. So I said I would conclude just very briefly about some of the things that NOAA is doing in this field of aquaculture sustainability. We have the challenge, as many federal agencies do, of balancing our stewardship and protection missions with that of a resource management. We're supposed to enable aquaculture to happen within those parameters of stewardship. And to support that, I manage a very broad-based program. It's focused on increasing science knowledge in aquaculture, technology transfer, management, and policy. I guess somewhere out of our back pockets, we're also supposed to do international coordination. One of our premier aquaculture science centers and collections of labs are right here in the Pacific Northwest, and some of you are here in the room. Increasingly, we're spending our time looking at the environmental effects of aquaculture, siting, coastal marine spatial planning, water quality and benthic effects, the genetics of marine fish and shellfish, disease, all of those things that we need to do as the knowledge that we need as managers to make decisions about permits and decisions about public policy, so the public side of aquaculture. We're also looking at the socioeconomic effects of aquaculture. We haven't done a lot on that. We'd like to do a lot more. So if you have ideas, please let me know. We're also working with the shellfish industry more and more, especially on the effects of climate change and ocean acidification. Something that's a big concern here, not just in the Northwest, but also on the East Coast. And at these labs, we're continuing to, let's say, foster innovation. Hatchery technologies, recirculating systems, integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, working with USDA on alternative feeds. We're also strengthening our management capabilities. We're adding regional coordinators in the regional offices for aquaculture, so that my job at the regional level. Over the past several years, we've worked with the USDA and the Fish and Wildlife Service on a national aquatic animal health plan, which went to the Federal Register last fall for public comments and will be finalized, I hope, sometime this spring and summer. It'll set up sort of a lab network around the country looking at aquatic animal health issues, protocols for federal agencies and states to follow, and also deals with trade issues. This year there'll be an announcement in the next couple of weeks about the National Marine Aquaculture Initiative. The Sea Grant program runs for the aquaculture program. In that, we're going to strengthen and add additional funding for aquaculture extension work around the country. So, last September, Dr. Jane Rubinio, our administrator, from a neighboring university down the way, announced plans to develop a new NOAA aquaculture policy. NOAA plans to seek broad public input to help shape this policy. This is important to Dr. Rubinio, it's important to me. I think it's your opportunity and the opportunity of the aquaculture community and those interested in aquaculture to let us know what's important to you. Let us know what kind of a program you think we should have and what our priorities should be for the next 5 years. So more details about that will come out through a variety of media on our website, on the NOAA website, in about a week or two. I grew up on Jacques Cousteau television shows. Some of you, I think, remember those. It was that gee whiz thing about the marine environment. I also grew up listening to my grandfather's stories on fishing on the Chesapeake Bay. And I think it was a combination of those things that really led me to natural resources and aquaculture. And I think if Jacques Cousteau had said this or written this today, this goes back, in the 70s, he would have added the word sustainable. We need how to learn to farm the sea sustainably. So back to the title of my talk. Is aquaculture sustainable use of the sea? And I think you're on the right track here in Washington State. Done right, with the protection of the environment in mind, and with the understanding that this is really an opportunity for the U.S., I would say yes in terms of answering the question. But marine aquaculture, at least the coastal and marine environment, operates in the public domain. So it has to be done in a way that reflects environmental stewardship. And as I said earlier, in terms of long-term economic sustainability, it's not jobs in the environment, it's jobs because of the environment. Perhaps most importantly, marine aquaculture will not succeed in this country unless it's socially acceptable. Communities don't want it in their backyard, it won't happen. So, from a national perspective, I think a compelling case can be made for growing more seafood right here. As I've argued, it's unlikely to happen unless it's sustainable. There are a number of factors, I think, that will continue to push the industry towards sustainability in the environmental, economic, and social spheres. Technological innovation, competitive pressures to reduce costs, the cost of energy and the cost of feed are real motivators for efficiency. Market demand for certified products, the sort of desire for local food supply, competition for sites, and the need to work closely with your neighbors in coastal communities. I think there's also a growing sense of personal responsibility here. We need to take responsibility for our own consumption decisions. To grow more of our food here at home rather than importing it and exporting environmental and social problems. So that's a quick tour of sustainability and aquaculture. Thank you very much for listening. I'd be happy to take some questions. Start on the back on my right.
I know we've talked down at the Pacific Coast Shellfish Growers Conference, and I know that NOAA's bailiwick or whatever jurisdiction that kind of extends out beyond the 3-mile limit. Have you had any occasions to talk to NIMS in terms of, although your jurisdiction's outside the 3-mile limit, NIMS has some say in how the state farms its lands and is involved in aquaculture. And I see that as a means. We were talking a little bit about how you could help the shellfish industry, which where I'm from. And that's the way I see right now, is you can talk to NIMS to try and encourage this more. Does that make any sense what I'm trying to say there?
Yeah, it does. I think because NOAA is a federal agency and because the U.S. Commission on Ocean Policy recommended that NOAA do something about aquaculture in federal waters, there was a push sort of before I came on board, as they say at NOAA, to draft legislation and to figure out some way of resolving the fisheries issues in federal waters. And so there was some legislation introduced in Congress, but it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. There's nobody out there in federal waters. Nobody's banging down Noah's door or NIMS's door to do aquaculture in federal waters, and they probably won't until we have a regulatory framework for that. In the meantime, if I looked at my job as a business, who are my clients? As I said, most of commercial marine aquaculture is shellfish farming. And we NOAA Fisheries, where I sit, have a lot of regulatory and policy responsibilities under existing laws and regulations for aquaculture in the coastal environment. Agnes and Stevens, endangered species, marine mammals, NEPA. So all of those consultations with the Corps of Engineers on shellfish birds, for example. We're trying to do a much better job on that. And that's actually what we spent a lot of our time over the past couple of years trying to reinforce and strengthen within NOAA. And I hope that that will pay dividends for you and your community in the next several years. But it takes time. It's, staffing, budgets. It's sort of that hard, nitty-gritty process of working on real people issues. So I think that was the second question over here, maybe.
You answered it, thanks.
Okay. Yeah.
You spoke to climate change and ocean acidification in passing. Could you talk a little bit more about anything that your programs are doing in looking at ocean acidification as it impacts shellfish aquaculture?
Well, I think as many of you know, there's been no natural set at Willapa Bay for 4 or 5 years now. And the shellfish industry here in the Northwest came to us and to USDA and to the state asking for assistance in terms of working with them to try to figure out why. Is it acidification? Is it a vibrio? Is it upwelling? Is it, what's going on? There's similar concerns on the East Coast. And so our labs have begun to work with the shellfish industry on water quality monitoring, looking at what might be going on in terms of ocean conditions, sort of that patient work that gets done in oceanography, and trying to figure that out. We've also, with USDA, looked at some sort of short-term grant funding to try to work with the industry on these challenges. I think it's part of our long-term portfolio of things we're going to have to work on more.
That's part of the answer of what I'm going to ask. Now, can you let us know what your vision is for the future? In the past, we've had 3 major departments that are all involved in aquaculture. First was the Interior, then Agriculture got involved, and it was decided that Agriculture would be the lead agency, and now we have NOAA involvement in here. So we have NOAA, Interior, and Agriculture, and what's your plan for the future as far as NOAA's contribution to the overall problem?
It's a good question about federal coordination. We have something called the Joint Subcommittee on Aquaculture under one of these White House coordinating committees. And I think the only reason why aquaculture gets elevated to that status is because in the Aquaculture Act of 1980, which gets reauthorized in every farm bill, it says the federal government shall have one of these coordinating committees. It's been a very, very useful tool. And I think with Jeff Silverstein, who's my counterpart now at the Agricultural Research Service, who I think did his work here at the University of Washington. Also with Gary Jensen, who's my counterpart at, it's now called the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. It used to be CSRES. And whoever's going to be the head of the hatchery system at Fish and Wildlife Service. We're trying to work very closely together. We get together regularly as an executive committee. We meet regularly. We're looking over each other's shoulders in terms of grant applications. We're also putting together a research plan for the federal government. There was a 1994 federal research plan, I think it was drafted, that never became official. And this White House policy coordinating group asked us to put together a national research strategy for aquaculture. And the industry's been asking us for this too, so that we're not tripping over each other as federal agencies. And we work on sort of our own areas of competency and coordinate. That's coming. Sometime, I think the chapters have been drafted. A number of you in this room have worked on some of the chapters. It's been sort of writing by committee. that takes time, but each chapter is only going to be about 3 or 4 pages long, these different topics. So it's really forcing us to boil down to what are the key issues in terms of federal coordination. So that's things to come.
You spoke about not wanting aquaculture to go the same way as agriculture policy in the U.S.
That's one of the things I hear. Yes.
And I am troubled because I think that commercial aquaculture in Washington, I don't have a particularly worldview, although I know some things about that, but I know more about Washington. But I see that happening, that what's going on in Washington aquaculture is the commercial guys are beefing it up big time. And your pictures that you show that they're in Washington show a lot of apparatus and stuff that's being used. And it's being put on beaches to the detriment of beaches for oysters, clams, gooey ducks, etc. And it's all about making money. So I want to know how NOAA is going to monitor what's going on in the state and keep us from sending those gooey ducks, which are really high value, to Japan or wherever, just so aquaculture farmers, commercial types, can make tons of money. That shouldn't be what it's totally about. It shouldn't be about beefing up aquaculture in order for some particular people to make tons of money, and that is not sustainable.
Well, I think, as I said, we're trying to take a triple bottom line approach to things. Shellfish farming happens in state waters, so it's primarily a state-led thing in terms of policy and regulation, although the federal government has a fair amount to say in terms of Corps of Engineers permits and NOAA fisheries consulting on essential fish habitat and endangered species issues relative to Corps permits. I think what we've tried to do at NOAA is to, as I said, we're looking at the various environmental effects of aquaculture so that we can do our job from a management perspective in terms of those consultations with the Corps and in terms of how we review grant proposals, for example. So a couple of years ago, we had a symposium on aquaculture, on shellfish in the environment, held in Rhode Island. It was attended by people from around the country. Some of the leading scientists from around the world came together to talk about all of those nitty-gritty issues in shellfish in the environment that you talked about. That's going to be published in a book, edited by Sandy Shumway from the University of Connecticut shortly. And we've also asked Sandy and a group of people to then sort of pull together a more user-friendly version that will be on the website, looking at each one of these key environmental questions in shellfish farming, providing sort of a risk analysis decision tree, and then where you can go to for scientific information about these various issues. So that people sitting in Corps offices, or state offices, or NOAA fisheries offices have got some guidance and some references to go to in terms of these issues. So, back.
I'm from the shellfish industry, I think you heard that. I just wanted to address one of the points that the woman prior to me made. I've been farming buoy ducks since 1997. I raised most of the money that we got from friends and family members. So they've been investors for 13 years. They have yet to earn half the money back that they originally invested in. So this idea that we're making tons of profits and getting rich beyond our wildest imagination is just factually incorrect. And I'd be happy to show our financials to anybody like yourself if you'd like to see them. I just want to make that educate the audience.
Do we have any other questions? Here, please.
No. I'd like to
I'd like
say who I am and why I've been paying attention since he identified himself. My name is Pat Sumter. I'm with Sierra, and we've been watching this, and I'm not saying anything about you particularly, and I don't know how much you learned over a long period of time. What I know is that the buoy duck aquaculture is beefing up. Maybe they haven't got there yet, but they are beefing up big time, and they are screwing up our beaches.
We had a question here.
I just had a comment that's very related as a follow-up on the Aquaculture Association. That is that modern agriculture is probably the most environmentally damaging activity a human state
Many of you have probably read Michael Pollan's book, The Omnivore's Dilemma. If you substitute the word aquaculture for agriculture in that book, as I did sort of reading through it and some of his other books, it does get you to think about that question. And I think many of us can see small and medium-sized enterprises that are done in a way that Bill McDonough and Paul Hawkins and Amy Lovins would like us to do it. The question is, how do we get to scale? How do we feed large numbers of people that way? Is it going to be a collection of a lot of little things? We're nowhere near scale. We don't have any large-scale aquaculture producers here in this country. None. The largest aquaculture company in this country, if it was a company, would be the salmon hatchery system here in Washington State. So I think we have a little bit of time, I'd like to think, at least here in the United States, to work on these issues if the industry is given a chance to expand. And it's not clear it isn't going to expand, given all the constraints we talked about. So that's why I said we're at a crossroad. Julia.
So certainly in the 70s and 80s, there was this great promise of aquaculture feeding the world. And part of that was a social contract. But part of it also was thinking about decreasing pressure on wild capture fisheries. And that didn't happen. And part of that's because there are a lot more people now than we have then. So I'm kind of wondering what NOAA's position is as you look forward to making aquaculture sustainable and efficient and innovative and productive. What are NOAA's plans to actually attempt to integrate aquaculture and wild capture policy so that there is a chance for, if not balance, at least more interaction?
Yeah, that would have been a good question to ask Jane Lachenko when she was here a couple of days ago. And I'll be better able to answer it officially when we have a new policy. So let me just speak personally rather than from Noah, if I may, on that subject. We've been, as I said, I think I tried to say, we've been trying to stop thinking about aquaculture over here and fishing over here, and to think about a range of technologies that produce seafood, and a range of technologies that can be used for other reasons as well, like restoration. And to do that a little bit more holistically, I know we have our stovepipes of, the fisheries division and the aquaculture division, the habitat division, the technical resources division. But for example, the fisheries guys and NOAA Fisheries are coming to me and saying, how can we use aquaculture to implement Magnuson-Stevens and these catch share programs? As we rationalize fisheries in a sense, one of the things that the fisheries law says is we're supposed to think about coastal communities. So can aquaculture play a role in that in terms of providing an alternative, a supplemental employment and whatnot? There's a whole bunch of fishermen in Maine, for example, who want to be trained in cod farming. I don't know if it'll work. Cod farming is pretty risky. But they want to put some of their own sweat equity and money into trying this over the next several years. I mentioned shellfish as a natural in terms of that. Yeah, I think this whole area of marine spatial planning, coastal marine spatial planning, is something the aquaculture industry is not quite sure about because is it another reason just to delay things? We have to look at everything for the next 5 years. But I think it's a way of, especially if you can bring it down to the local planning level, of looking at some of these conflicting uses that you talked about and trying to locate aquaculture in places where it makes sense and to have that complement fisheries and other uses of the coast. So I think we're very much in the beginning of trying to do that. As I said, your advice about how we go forward and do that would be much appreciated. So, thanks again.